Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 24, Part 2, Plodding, Bloviating and Plotting. Kegot looked his children over in the pre-dawn light as they woke. Esran had recovered better than he'd hoped. Oh, to be young again. Shish was her usual, charming, morning self. They packed, opened the door, and found Piva standing outside with a pitchfork. The man sneered. "I had hoped to take over your position as head indenture the easy way, by marrying your daughter and slowly edging you aside. She had to go catch the voter's eye though. And now you plan to run and spoil everything. After all these years, after all I did for you, after I shielded you from the barbs of everyone else here, and you are going to just leave? How dare you? Get back in that hut, and I will pretend that this didn't happen. I won't tell Voter Agrand." Kegot shook his head. "Move aside, Piva. You hold no cards here, and..." Shish's voice sounded behind him. "And I will die before I let either of you snub-tailed bastards lay a hand on me. Now, move, like my father said." Piva's voice came out loud and mocking. "Like my father said, like my father said. Do you know how much I have tired of those words? How much we have tired of those words? Haven't we, everyone?" Several people stepped into view from behind various huts. All of them carried farm implements which they clearly intended to use in a very non-farming fashion. Kegot cut Piva off before he could continue. "After all these years, this is how all of you repay me. I never wanted to bring any of you here, but I have tried to do the best by you that I could. I have begged, borrowed, and mortgaged my very soul to get you better building materials. I have traded on the black market to get meds for your sick children. Are you blind? Have you not seen that Agrand treats me with even greater contempt than he treats any of the rest of you? Did you really think that any of the things I got to try and make your lives better had somehow come from him? No, I used those hidden caches you have been raiding so you could shirk your work to buy supplies. I used the surplus that I siphoned off to buy medications. I have scrimped and fought for you all, and for what? So you could steal from those same caches to work a little less. So you could squeal like a stuck croak to the voter when I tried to keep my dear wife alive. And now, so that you can stand there and try to force me to give my own daughter up to the one we all should hate." He shook his head and put his hands in his pockets. When they came out, he held two things he'd hoped not to have to use: a detonator and a pulse pistol. "There's a note in the house. That note advises you all to run, even tells you how you could possibly get safely away from here. I had planned to give all of you until Agrand came back, several days from now still, to run, to get yourselves a head start. I still will, because I want that same head start, but only if all of you put those things down and get out of my way. Now." Several of them began to step back, some with their tails tucked up behind them. Piva looked at them and snarled, "Hold still, all of you, or I will come for you next. There are more of us than there are of him. We will take this voter wannabe and feed him to Agrand." Shish's voice came out in a near whisper, but it carried. "You are the one who sounds like a voter, Piva." A few people looked at the man and grumbled, but Kegot didn't like the looks on the faces of the rest of them as they started to advance. He held the detonator high. "Last warning, all of you. Out of the way." A few stopped, but Piva kept moving forward. So did far too many of the rest. Kegot shut his eyes and shook his head in sadness. "Forgive me, darling." In that moment, he was forced to admit the other reason he'd set the bombs to go off later. He didn't want to actually watch everything he'd built burn. He pushed the button. A series of small popping sounds came from the warehouses where they stored their crops. Piva ducked, then stood tall and smiled. "You old fool. You really had me going for a moment, but it looks like you aren't as smart as you thought. Fire! Fire!" By the time everyone turned to look at the speaker, every warehouse had flames visible in the windows. They all stood in horrified fascination as the flames went higher and soon shattered those windows with their heat. Kegot spoke just loud enough to be heard. "No, Piva, you voter in training, you are an idiot. Major explosives designed to blow the warehouses up would have been noticed before their timers went off and would have sent a lot of crop flying instead of destroying it. I understand this, and a great many things you don't. just like the voters, I may add. Things like the way the small holes those charges made in the buildings will funnel air through them and burn everything within to ash, while they will also fire the mudstones used to build them into bricks, harder than concrete. They will also fan the fires so that they will shoot pillars of flame far into the air, enough that they will be seen from town. You have a couple of days at most before word gets to a Grand and he comes here to investigate. But already there is little in those barns that can be used, and the fires are too far along for you to stop them. He tossed the detonator aside in contempt and pulled another from his pocket. If all of you will care to notice, however, the newest barn is not on fire. All of you know how to render the root down. There is enough there for you to divide between yourselves and sell on the black market for bribes to get away. A small feminine voice he couldn't place floated through the air. But where will we go? Kigot felt one corner of his lip raise up in a snarl. I don't care. I give you this chance for one reason, so that you will give me mine. This detonator will destroy that warehouse and leave you all without money for bribes, which means a choice between trying to survive in the wastes or facing Agrand's tender mercy. So, it is up to all of you. Come from me and my family, and we can all die before the week is out, or get out of my way and give us all a chance to live. Piva stepped forward, but Kigot pointed at him and addressed the crowd. This is the man you have to blame. He has tried repeatedly to rape my daughter, has no doubt lauded his supposed relationship with me over all of you, and, well, I don't know what else, but I can imagine. Think about it, all of you. What has he said? What has he done? How many strings has any aide he gave you had? I ask you true. Which of us has behaved like a voter? Me, who has tried to provide and now wants only to leave, or him, who is about to try to get you all to kill me out of spite? The grumbling of the crowd turned ugly, but all of their eyes focused on Piva. He held his hands up and tried to speak, but Kigot could see his words fell on closed ear holes. He turned, gathered his family, and left. Enibal was bored to drool. I haven't felt like this in a council meeting since before Henry arrived here. He looked around the council chamber and saw that several of the other ambassadors had nodded off. He checked his own screens to see whose turn it was to wake them. They'd already wasted one grand council session because the Yeltan and Eslan ambassadors had argued, just barely successfully, that sleeping ambassadors did not count as present, and therefore they'd lost their grand majority. Thankfully, he found it was Henry's turn and saw his brother dutifully sending the necessary messages. His lips formed a tight line as he snuck a glance at the Pinigran and Zoltan ambassadors. They sit there so smug. They know how unpopular these sessions are getting and are doing far too good a job with their whisper campaign to push the blame on Henry and his allies. He leaned over to Yoro. We have to do something about these sessions. The opposition has forced us to keep everyone here for the full time and keep people talking. Resorting to things like letting this guy sit and bloviate about his mother's cooking is wearing far too thin. I mean, the only thing we have going for us right now is the fact that there is nothing forcing us to keep all comments on topic. Yoro nodded. We have been looking for some sort of exception to the rules, or a precedent, but nothing has come up. We still have a lot of council sessions to read through though. Maybe we can find some sort of backdoor way to deal with. She waved her hand in a subtle gesture. This. Hannibal nodded to her. Yes, backdoor, thinking outside the box. Something had to be done. Only 3 months of this, and he already had neutral parties ready to jump ship. Grand sessions every few days where nothing of substance could be discussed, lest the Penigra declare the session a general session, and short-circuit their attempt to force him to use a point of order. He sighed heavily. If only we could actually use these grand sessions to get something useful done. There is so much going on with the war that we have to handle in more regular sessions that it leaves no time for the normal course of business. I mean, we still haven't addressed the fact that the sultans are replacing their slave labor force by illegally using indentureship as a punishment on their own people, and have to revisit the Zoltan military seizing neutral assets in the name of their war effort. Yoro shook her head. Doing anything substantive enough to force the Zoltans to stop is going to require yet another grand session. We are going to have to alter the language of the punishment decree regarding Zoltan indentures, and it will also require a grand session. To to formally declare the arguments they're using to seize assets false, and to impose penalties extreme enough to get them to stop. Enable nodded sadly. Then a thought hit him so hard he had to force himself to stay calm. Bored. Enable. You are bored out of your feet, and sitting here talking with Yoro just to try and pass the time. Yoro, of course, had seen the flash of excitement and leaned in closer. He allowed himself a small wry smile as he spoke in tones meant not to carry. You are right. Each of those would require a vote in a grand session. And the Penigra is likely to try to block them, since they would hinder the Zoltan war effort. There is nothing, however, preventing us from bringing all of them up in the same session, so long as we don't mind losing the ability to hold a no-confidence vote. Enable had to suppress a smile when Yoro's eyes widened as the implications set in. He continued, Quick, shake your head, like I made some sort of off-color comment, just in case someone is watching. She complied, then got that odd expression which told him she was paying attention to the display on her glasses. He waited for a moment, then asked the important question. Is there anything that prevents the ambassador from using more than one point of order in a session?